When I first walked into Nancy's room, she startled like a trapped bird. Her frail, curly-haired frame stiffened, and her trembling hands disappeared under the pillow. It took me a moment to realize why. She was hiding a gun. I've been a hospice nurse for 12 years, and I've seen everything: patients smuggling alcohol, painkillers, even a man who tried to sneak in an escort once. But a gun? That was new. Her blue-gray eyes locked onto mine, wild and frightened. "They're coming for me, Lydia," she whispered, her voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. "They want me dead." I thought she was talking about loan sharks, maybe an old debt gone bad, or some cartel-like family drama. But I was wrong. So wrong. Nancy, 83, elegant, and far too proud to ever show fear, was terrified of her own grandchildren. "Your grandchildren?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm as I gently coaxed the pillow away. "Why would they want to hurt you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the fight in her, the part of her that had probably carried her through life's storms, holding on tight to control. "Finally," she said, "because they think I'm just a bag of money with a heartbeat." I'd heard families fight over inheritances before, but Nancy's case was different. Her 3 grandchildren, a successful lawyer, a top-selling realtor, and a bank clerk, had already stripped her of nearly everything that held sentimental value. 2 of her late husband's vintage cars had mysteriously disappeared from her garage months ago. She fought through court, begged the police, and somehow got them back. But by then, her rare coin collection was gone. So was her jewelry box, filled with pieces her husband had given her over 40 years of marriage. I watched her hands, soft, manicured, dotted with liver spots, clutch the edge of her blanket like a child clinging to safety. "I raised them, Lydia," she whispered. "When their mother abandoned them, it was me who stayed. I cooked, I held them when they were sick, I bought them their first shoes. And now they look at me like I'm just a vault to crack open." Nancy wasn't like the other elderly women I cared for. There was nothing fragile about her spirit, even as her body failed. She was wealthy, impeccably groomed, her silver curls always perfectly set. Every night, she massaged her face with creams that cost more than my monthly rent. 8 golden rings hugged her fingers, diamonds winked in her ears. We'd begged her to remove the jewelry for safety, but she refused. "If I take them off, Lydia, they'll vanish," she said once. "Everything else already has." I asked her, once, where all the money came from. "My husband worked in banking," she said with a wistful smile. "I hardly saw him at home. But I could afford anything I wanted." Now, though, here she was, in a hospice bed, her lungs weak, her body frail, yet clutching a pistol under her pillow like a soldier at war. I thought it was paranoia. I thought the sickness had clouded her judgment. But I was wrong about that, too. Because over the next few weeks, strange things began happening. First, her lawyer grandson crashed his car into a lamppost after someone had loosened his brake lines. No one could explain it. Then, the realtor, beautiful, polished, ruthless, woke up one morning to find her entire front yard flooded. The pipes had been deliberately broken. The water damage alone would cost tens of thousands. And the youngest one, the bank clerk? His girlfriend dumped him after a video of him cheating appeared online. Anonymously uploaded. Perfectly timed. Each disaster came days apart. None fatal. None traced. Nancy, of course, never left her bed. Not once. Cameras confirmed it. Staff confirmed it. But I remember one night, one of those quiet, midnight shifts when the whole hospice seemed to hold its breath. I walked past her room, and her bed was empty. Just empty. The window was open, the curtains fluttering like pale ghosts in the night breeze. I checked the hallways, the garden, even the bathrooms. Nothing. 20 minutes later, I came back, and there she was, tucked neatly under her blanket, pretending to sleep. When I asked her about it the next morning, she smiled, soft and secretive. "Don't you worry about me, Lydia," she said. "Sometimes, karma just needs a little push." I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. Because I had no idea what Nancy was truly capable of, or how far she was willing to go to make them pay. The night I found Nancy's bed empty, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the open window, the cool night breeze, the faint smell of lilacs drifting in from the garden. I kept telling myself I imagined it. That I was tired. That maybe the aide had moved her for some reason. But no one had. The cameras in the hallway showed nothing. No Nancy. No wheelchair. No shadow slipping past the nurse's station. And yet, somehow, she was gone for 20 minutes. How does a woman who hasn't walked in years just vanish? I wanted to believe I'd made a mistake. But the very next morning, Nancy's grandson, the lawyer, showed up at the hospice, his face pale, his right arm in a sling. "Car accident," he muttered when he signed the visitor log. "Brakes failed." Failed. My stomach dropped. Later that afternoon, I went to check Nancy's vitals. She was sitting up, her silver curls pinned neatly, sipping chamomile tea as if nothing in the world could touch her. But when I mentioned her grandson's accident, she froze. Just for a second. And then she smiled. A slow, satisfied smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, did it?" she said softly. "How unfortunate." There was something in her tone that unsettled me. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was something darker. That's when I started watching her more closely. 3 nights later, I worked the overnight shift again. Around 1:30 a.m., I passed Nancy's room and noticed the curtains swaying gently. The window was open. I froze. Her bed, empty. Again. This time, I didn't call security. I didn't want her to know I was onto her. Instead, I slipped into the shadows near the end of the hallway, where the motion sensor lights didn't quite reach, and waited. At exactly 2:04 a.m., headlights swept across the parking lot. A taxi slowed to a stop beneath the lone oak tree. And there she was. Nancy. 83 years old. Supposedly unable to walk without assistance. Sliding out the window like a cat burglar, using a knotted bedsheet for balance, and climbing into the back seat of the cab. I didn't follow her. Not that night. But the next morning, the news broke. Her granddaughter, the glamorous realtor, had woken to find her prized Mercedes keyed from hood to bumper. On her front lawn, someone had spray-painted one word in bright red, thief. No security cameras caught anything. No witnesses. No leads. And when I came to check on Nancy, I noticed something peculiar. Her fingernails. Perfectly manicured as always, except for a faint red smudge under her thumbnail. I thought about telling someone. The head nurse. The hospice director. Maybe even the police. But every time I tried to picture it, I saw her sitting there, tiny and fragile in her expensive silk nightgown, a dying woman clinging to the last scraps of her dignity. Was she really dangerous? Or was this just justice? A week later, I had my answer. The youngest grandson, the bank clerk, showed up at the hospice, storming into her room without even knocking. His voice was loud enough for everyone on the floor to hear. "You did this," he shouted, his face red. "You ruined me." Nancy didn't even flinch. She set down her teacup, folded her hands neatly in her lap, and looked him straight in the eye. "You ruined yourself, Matthew," she said softly. "I just helped the truth find you faster." I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. Because that was the night I realized Nancy wasn't acting on impulse. She had a plan. A meticulous, step-by-step vendetta against the 3 people she once loved most. And for the first time, I began to wonder if she was capable of something more than sabotage. Something worse. Something irreversible. By the time Matthew, the youngest grandson, stormed into Nancy's room and accused her of ruining his life. The hospice staff had started whispering. It wasn't just me anymore. Everyone had noticed the coincidences. First the lawyer's brakes. Then the realtor's Mercedes and the humiliating red spray paint. And finally, Matthew's breakup. His girlfriend dumping him after a video of him cheating somehow appeared online. One coincidence is nothing. Two makes you wonder. Three starts to look like a pattern. I told myself it was all in my head. That an 83-year-old woman with failing lungs couldn't possibly orchestrate all this. But every time I walked past her door at night and saw the faint glow from her bedside lamp, I wondered. Nancy spent hours awake, scribbling in a small black notebook she kept tucked beneath her pillow. She never let anyone touch it. 2 weeks later, everything escalated. Detective Richard Sloane came to the hospice. I remember the day perfectly, a gray Tuesday morning when the rain tapped softly against the windows. He walked in wearing a rumpled suit and the kind of expression that says he hasn't slept in days. "Lydia Parker?" he asked, flashing his badge. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I need to talk about your patient. Nancy Whitmore." The way he said her name, clipped, deliberate, made my stomach knot. He explained that Matthew, the bank clerk grandson, had gone missing. He'd left work 3 days earlier and never come home. His car was found abandoned near a lake outside of town. No wallet. No phone. And then Detective Sloane said something that made my skin crawl. "Every major incident tied to this family in the last month seems to have one common thread," he said, leaning closer. "Your patient." I swallowed hard. She hasn't left her bed." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I wasn't. Not even close. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the open windows, the taxis, the faint smudge of red under her nails. I needed answers. At 1 a.m., I sat quietly in the nurse's station, pretending to chart vitals, but my eyes stayed fixed on the hallway camera feed. At exactly 1:47 a.m., I saw movement. Nancy's window. Open. And then, the silhouette. Her silhouette. Moving, slow but steady, climbing out into the night. I grabbed my jacket and slipped outside, careful not to trigger the motion lights. I crouched behind the hydrangeas near the parking lot as a taxi pulled up. Nancy slid into the back seat like she'd done this 100 times before. I couldn't hear what she said to the driver, but I caught one thing, an address. Matthew's apartment. My heart raced so fast I thought I might pass out. The next morning, I walked into her room pretending nothing had happened. Nancy sat propped against her pillows, sipping her tea as if she hadn't climbed out of a hospice window in the middle of the night. "How are you feeling today?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. She looked at me over the rim of her teacup, her blue-gray eyes sharp and calculating. "Lighter," she said simply. "Lighter?" She smiled faintly. "Some debts weigh on you for years. And then one night, you pay them back, and suddenly, you can breathe again." There was a silence between us, heavy and electric. For the first time, I was afraid of her. That afternoon, Detective Sloane came back. "We found something," he said, his jaw tight. Matthew's apartment door was unlocked. Inside, we discovered signs of a struggle. My pulse thundered in my ears. "And we found this on the floor," he added, holding up a single item in an evidence bag. A gold ring. One of Nancy's 8 rings. That night, I dreamed of her, standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight, her rings glinting like tiny knives in the dark. And when I woke up, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done yet. Because if Nancy had crossed the line from sabotage to something darker, then no one in her family was safe. Detective Sloane came back the next morning, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "We checked the security footage around Matthew's apartment," he said quietly. No sign of Nancy. No sign of anyone, actually. It's like whoever got in, didn't exist. "Maybe Matthew just left," I offered carefully. He shook his head. His bank accounts untouched. No credit card activity. No phone pings. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth. My throat went dry. Because I'd seen Nancy leave the hospice that night. I'd heard her whisper Matthew's address to the taxi driver. And yet, there was no proof. That evening, I stopped by Nancy's room to bring her medication. The lamp was off, the curtains drawn, and she was fast asleep. At least, I thought she was. On the bedside table, half hidden beneath a silk scarf, was the little black notebook I'd seen her guard so fiercely. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew better. But my hand moved before my brain could stop it. I opened it. Inside were lists. Names, dates, addresses. Beside each name, notes in Nancy's elegant, looping script. Daniel Whitmore, breaks. He'll panic, but he'll survive. Samantha Whitmore, paint. Shame cuts deeper than loss. Matthew Whitmore, disappearance. Fear is the sharpest punishment. My breath caught. And beneath those three names, there was a fourth. Richard Sloane. Detective Sloane. No notes. Just his name. Underlined twice. I closed the notebook so fast it nearly slipped from my hands. The next day, Samantha, the granddaughter, burst into the hospice like a storm. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her mascara smeared. She did this, she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Nancy's door. She locked me in my own wine cellar. I was trapped for hours. What? I asked, stunned. Samantha's voice cracked. The door was jammed from the outside. And the lights, they went out. It was pitch black, Lydia. And when I finally got out, there was a note taped to the door. She handed me the crumpled paper. In delicate cursive, it read. Imagine losing what you love most. Samantha was shaking so hard I thought she might faint. When we went to Nancy's room, she sat there calmly, sipping her tea as though nothing had happened. Where were you last night? Detective Sloane asked sharply. Nancy looked up, feigning confusion. Here, she said. Ask anyone. Lydia, dear, didn't you see me? And she wasn't lying, at least, not technically. I'd seen her in her bed during the hourly rounds. The cameras backed it up. She had an alibi. Again. That night, Sloane cornered me in the hallway. I don't know how she's doing it, he whispered. But she's toying with them. And now she's toying with me. He ran a hand down his tired face. This isn't just revenge anymore. This is control. I thought about the notebook. About his name on the list. About the underlines. She's dying, I said softly, trying to convince myself as much as him. She just wants closure. He shook his head. No, Lydia. This isn't closure. This is war. Later that night, I saw her window open again. But this time, I wasn't the only one watching. Detective Sloane sat in his unmarked car, parked across the street, his eyes locked on that second-floor window. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. And Nancy's silhouette appeared, graceful, steady, like a shadow from another life. But just as she moved toward the window, the light in her room flickered. Then went out. Total darkness. When Sloane looked up again, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared of what Nancy was doing. But because for the first time, I wondered if she was working alone. I should have left the notebook alone. But one night, while Nancy was asleep, I couldn't help myself. I opened it again, my hands trembling as though the pages might burn me. And there it was. My name. Lydia Parker. No dates. No notes. Just my name, underlined once. My chest tightened. Why me? What had I done? I stared at it until the letters blurred, until my breath came too fast. That's when I heard her voice, soft and sharp in the darkness. "You shouldn't read other people's secrets, Lydia." I froze. Nancy's eyes were open. Wide awake. Watching me. I was just. She smiled faintly, that same secretive smile that always left me unsettled. "Curiosity," she whispered. "It can be dangerous." I put the notebook back under her pillow and left the room, my heart pounding. The next morning, Matthew returned. He walked into the hospice unannounced, thinner than before, his face pale, his hands shaking. But it wasn't relief I saw in his eyes. It was fear. Detective Sloane and I sat with him in the small family lounge. "Where have you been, Matthew?" Sloane demanded. Matthew stared at his trembling hands. I don't know," he whispered. "What do you mean, you don't know?" He swallowed hard. "I woke up in a cabin. Middle of nowhere. No phone, no wallet. The windows were boarded up. There was music playing. Same song. Over and over." Sloane leaned forward. "Who took you?" Matthew hesitated. Then whispered, "I never saw anyone." But, he glanced toward Nancy's room down the hall. His lips trembled. I could hear her voice. Every night. Telling me to remember what I'd done. My skin prickled. She let me go," he stammered. "Said it wasn't time yet." Sloane cursed under his breath and stormed out of the room. I stayed frozen in my chair, trying to make sense of it. That night, Sloane decided to set a trap. "We'll watch her window," he told me quietly. "I'll follow her wherever she goes. And this time, we'll catch her in the act." At 1:30 a.m., we waited in silence, watching her window from the unmarked car. 1:45, nothing. 1:55, still nothing. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., the lamp in Nancy's room flickered, and went out. Sloane tensed. "This is it." But when we ran inside, expecting to find an open window or an empty bed, Nancy was sitting up, calmly reading a book. "Trouble sleeping, detective?" she asked sweetly. Sloane's jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me." She set her book down and folded her hands in her lap. "You think you're hunting me," she said softly, "but you're already caught." Then she gestured toward his chest. Confused, Sloane looked down. And that's when he saw it, a small, folded note tucked into the breast pocket of his own jacket. "I don't know when she put it there. I don't know how." Sloane unfolded it slowly. Inside, written in delicate cursive. "You should be careful where you follow me." Sloane's face went pale. The next morning, he came to me, looking shaken. "She knows everything, Lydia," he said, rubbing his temples. "Every move I make. Every step I take." "You think someone's helping her?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Someone has to be. There's no way she could do this alone." I thought about the notebook. About my name in it. And for the first time, a terrifying question formed in my mind. What if she wasn't punishing me yet, because I was still useful to her? That night, I locked Nancy's window myself. Double-checked it. Triple-checked it. And yet, when I walked past her room at 2:30 a.m., it was open. The curtains swayed in the cool night breeze. And the bed was empty. I thought I'd seen everything. But nothing prepared me for that final week. Nancy was growing weaker. Her breaths shorter, her hands trembling more each day. And yet, somehow, she seemed triumphant. Like a queen surveying her conquered kingdom. Detective Sloane, meanwhile, was unraveling. He barely slept, pacing the hospice halls at night, convinced Nancy had an accomplice. He checked every taxi company, every security feed, every possible lead. But every time he thought he had her cornered, she slipped through his fingers. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything came crashing down. I walked into Nancy's room to find her sitting up in bed, the black notebook open in her lap. She looked at me, her blue-gray eyes clear and sharp, and patted the chair beside her. "It's time you knew, Lydia," she said softly. "Sit." I hesitated but obeyed. She opened the notebook and showed me something I'd never seen before, the back pages. Blueprints. She had drawn detailed maps of her grandchildren's homes. Diagrams of their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. Every prank, every mishap, every orchestrated disaster, planned down to the minute. "How?" I whispered. "How could you do all this?" She smiled faintly. "I may be dying, Lydia," she said, "but I'm not helpless. I had friends. Favors owed. People who remember what it feels like to be betrayed." I stared at her, struggling to breathe. "So you had help?" Her smile widened. "No, dear. I gave help. I showed people what strings to pull. I didn't need to walk anywhere. Fear travels faster than footsteps." Just then, there was a knock on the door. Detective Sloane stepped in, holding a manila folder. His jaw was tight, his voice clipped. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "we found Matthew." Nancy tilted her head, unbothered. "Oh. And how is my sweet boy?" Sloane hesitated. "He checked himself into a psychiatric clinic last night." Nancy's expression didn't change. "Good," she whispered. "Maybe now he'll understand what it feels like to be abandoned." I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for what happened to Tyler, Nancy's oldest grandson. He was the golden boy of the family. A corporate lawyer, expensive suits, perfect hair, perfect smile, the kind of man who believed the world owed him everything. He barely visited Nancy, unless he wanted something, a loan, a signature, a favor. I overheard Detective Sloane talking on the phone, his voice sharp and low. "Yeah, they found him," he said. A pause. "In a psychiatric facility. Voluntary admission." Tyler had checked himself in. And I needed to know why. 2 weeks later, I found out. Nancy had left behind not just jewelry and a mountain of legal documents, but also a series of letters. Handwritten, sealed, each labeled with a name. Tyler's was the thickest. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Tyler in places he shouldn't have been. At nightclubs with questionable company. Meeting clients at illegal poker rooms. Signing contracts that tied him to money laundering schemes. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Nancy had also included bank statements. Dates. Account numbers. Even hidden offshore transfers Tyler thought no one knew about. And at the very top, in her perfect cursive handwriting, Nancy had written just one sentence. "Confession is the beginning of forgiveness." Tyler thought it was just a threat. But Nancy was far smarter than that. 3 days before her death, she mailed an anonymous package to Tyler's law firm. It contained copies of everything. And a note. "If you don't clean your mess, I will." Tyler panicked. He tried to intercept the package. He called the office, made excuses, begged his assistant to destroy anything unusual. But by the time he arrived, it was too late. The managing partners had already seen everything. They didn't fire him immediately, no, that would have been too easy. Instead, they placed him under internal investigation, suspended his cases, and froze his accounts pending review. Suddenly, the golden boy wasn't golden anymore. But Nancy didn't stop there. Remember that retro Mustang they stole from her garage? Tyler had secretly sold it to cover a massive gambling debt. What he didn't know was that Nancy had reported the theft before he touched it, and the police had quietly been tracking the car for months. The Mustang resurfaced in Miami, right in the middle of a federal smuggling investigation. Guess whose name was on the bill of sale? Tyler's. The pressure broke him. First came the sleepless nights. Then the paranoia. He started seeing Nancy everywhere, in reflections, in shadows, in dreams. His co-workers said he'd talk to himself in the hallway, whispering, "She knows, she knows." And then, one night, Tyler walked into a psychiatric hospital and signed himself in. Diagnosis? Acute stress disorder. But I knew better. It wasn't stress. It was Nancy. You see, Nancy never raised a hand against him. She never called the police, never shouted, never threatened. She simply turned the mirror and made Tyler face himself. All his lies. All his crimes. All his greed. She forced him to live in the world he'd created, and for Tyler, that was the cruelest punishment of all. Sometimes, when I walk past Nancy's empty room, I think about Tyler, sitting in a white hospital gown under fluorescent lights, rocking back and forth, mumbling her name. And I wonder if Nancy planned it this way all along. Because if there's one thing I've learned. When Nancy wanted revenge, she didn't just take from you. She made you destroy yourself. Sloane's knuckles whitened around the folder. This ends now, he growled. No more games. But Nancy only laughed softly, a dry, raspy sound. Detective, the game was over before you even knew you were playing. That night, she called me to her bedside. Do you know why your name is in my notebook? She asked suddenly. I nodded nervously. Because I know too much. She shook her head slowly. No, Lydia. Because you're my witness. When I'm gone, someone has to tell the story. Someone has to make sure they never twist it into theirs. I felt my throat tighten. Nancy, why go this far? Why not just let it go? Her eyes glistened in the dim lamplight. Because letting go is for the forgiven, she whispered. And I forgive none of them. Nancy passed away 3 nights later. Peacefully, in her sleep. Her funeral was small. None of the grandchildren came. After the service, Detective Sloane approached me, his expression grim. We searched her belongings, he said. Found dozens of letters. Old debts, favors, records of payments. She had an entire network helping her. I nodded silently. None of it surprised me anymore. But then he handed me something I wasn't expecting, the black notebook. I thought you should have it, he said. You were closest to her. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, turning the worn pages, trying to make sense of everything. On the very last page, written in fresh ink, was a single line. Don't look for the accomplice, Lydia. You've already met them. I froze. Because tucked inside the back cover was a small, glossy photo. Detective Sloane. Standing beside Nancy. Smiling. Dated 2 months before he ever came to the hospice. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Nancy hadn't just been one step ahead of all of us. She'd been leading the dance from the very beginning. I thought Nancy's death would be the end of her story. But I was wrong. A week after the funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about the last page of her notebook, the photo of Detective Sloane smiling next to Nancy. It didn't make sense. Why would a man investigating her be standing beside her 2 months before he even met her? I had to know. I called an old friend of mine, Claire, who worked at the county records office. Run a quick check on Sloane, I asked. Something's off. When Claire called me back that evening, her voice was low and tense. Lydia, you didn't hear this from me, okay? Sloane's marriage is a mess. His wife's been threatening to leave him for months. And get this, he's been seeing a 27-year-old yoga instructor. Quietly. Very quietly. I sat there, stunned. Does Nancy know? Claire sighed. If she didn't, she does now. You know those private investigators Sloane always uses on his cases? Yes. She hired one of them to follow him. Suddenly, it all made sense. Nancy wasn't just a frail old woman. She was a strategist. A master manipulator. While Sloane thought he was investigating her, she'd been investigating him. I imagined it vividly, Nancy sitting up in her bed at night, flipping through glossy surveillance photos. Sloane slipping into a quiet cafe with his young lover. Holding hands in a parking lot. Laughing. Thinking no one would ever find out. Nancy had it all. And she used it. One night, while Sloane was interrogating her about the missing jewelry, Nancy leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me, detective," she said, tilting her head. "Does Emily know about Chloe?" I can almost picture Sloane's face freezing, the color draining from his cheeks. "You, what?" he managed to stammer. Nancy smiled sweetly, twisting one of her diamond rings. "Chloe. 27. Teaches yoga 3 times a week at Lotus and Light Studio. Drives a blue Honda Civic. Do you need me to go on?" That was the moment Sloane stopped being the hunter and became the hunted. From that day forward, he wasn't investigating Nancy, he was protecting her. Covering her tracks. Redirecting leads. Closing doors before anyone else could open them. And Nancy? She played him like a violin. She never raised her voice, never made an explicit threat. All she had to do was leave a manila envelope on his car seat one evening. Inside, 3 photos and a typed note. "Emily deserves the truth. Unless, of course, you'd rather keep this between us." Sloane folded faster than I thought possible. And yet, here's the part that still haunts me. She didn't ruin him. She didn't leak the photos, didn't tell his wife, didn't breathe a word. She didn't need to. Nancy understood something most people never do: real power is silent. By holding his secret, she owned him completely. After I learned all this, I couldn't stop seeing Sloane differently. Every time he scowled at me in the hospice halls, every time he slammed a file shut, every time he barked questions, I saw the truth in his eyes. Fear. Nancy had stripped him down to his bones, and he hated her for it. But he feared her more. In the end, Nancy didn't just beat her greedy grandchildren. She bent a detective to her will. She turned a predator into a pawn. And she did it all from a hospital bed, wearing 8 gold rings and a smile. Even now, when I think back on it, I get chills. Because I realized something terrifying. If Nancy could control a man like Sloane without ever leaving her room, what else had she planned that we'll never know about?